I'd like to call to order the City of Bothell Planning Commission meeting. Tonight is Wednesday, April 17th, 2019, and all commissioners are present with the exception of Commissioner Patrick Cape, who is absent and excused. With that, we will go ahead and open up to non-agenda public comments. If anybody has any comments that are not related to anything we're discussing this evening. And we have one person here that's probably related to what we're doing this evening. Yeah. Then we don't have any non-agenda public comments. And with that, I'll take an approval of the minutes or a motion once you all have had a chance to read them.
Move to approve the minutes from March 20th, 2019 and April 3rd, 2019.
And I would second that motion.
Okay, all those in favor of approving the minutes from March 20th and April 3rd of 2019, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, the motion carries with Commissioner Cabe absent and excused. There's no new business this evening, and with that, we will continue the public hearing with critical area regulation amendments. Looks like we're joined tonight by, we have two senior planners here, but it looks like Dave Boyd will lead us through this section in the agenda.
Yes, thank you and good evening. This is a continued public hearing from April 3rd. And just by way of background, these critical area regulation amendments were initiated by Council initially in 2018 to address 3 points: FEMA floodplain management guidelines, recent ecology wetlands rating system changes, and clarifying the regulations with regard to streams. And then with the 2019 docket, we added coordination with shoreline management program update to that list. To date, we have discussed deferring some items to 2020. We learned as we got underway that new floodplain guidance is now expected by the end of 2019 from both FEMA and the Department of Ecology's floodplain staff. And we've received ecology comments that our current wetland buffers are substandard per their current model code, and our best available science references are out of date. The 2018 docket did not include a full review of our wetland buffers, nor a best available science review. And the 2018-2019 budget doesn't include the needed funds for consultant services to do that. So for those reasons, we have recommended deferring that to 2020 with the hopes of getting funding to do that then. So the amendments that are before you today are not exactly just housekeeping amendments, but they do include a lot of updates of references, some updates of definitions, and many of those updates coincide with updates that are included in the 2019 Shoreline Management Program update. So in the packet tonight, there are responses to questions from previous meetings. I'm not going to go into that in any detail. I just wanted to bullet point them here. There were questions about or interest in seeing a comparison to other wetland buffers, both in our Shoreline Master Program and in other jurisdictions. The Shoreline Master Program buffers more closely match the ecology model code buffers. Other jurisdictions vary fairly widely. Kenmore's are fairly similar to ours, whereas Kirkland has buffers that are in line with the ecology guidelines. There were questions at the April 3rd hearing about basement and wetland definitions, and I'm glad to entertain any further questions related to the responses in the packet to that and any of these. There were questions regarding the category wetland, 1 wetlands in Bothell, where those were, and so I've elaborated a bit on the response made at the last meeting in the packet. Questions about how the code addresses construction impacts and the definition for qualified professionals, particularly the exception that allows non-certified professionals that have field experience to be qualified per the code guidelines. And then finally, there was a request to see what the Shoreline Board has crafted as a recommendation for offsite mitigation, and that was included in the memo as well. That full section of the Shoreline Code. And along those lines, that section does include the diagram that you see on the screen there, which basically just illustrates the priorities for mitigation. That the first priority, the most preferred, is on-site, and then when you move to off-site mitigation, the next priority is mitigation on an adjacent property. Third, and this is per the Shoreline Code, in the same sub drainage basin or Sammamish River reach. Third, within the city or municipal growth area, and the fourth would be in an adjacent jurisdiction, and that is the least preferred. So the packet tonight includes proposed Planning Commission findings, which include a description of the process, amendments, and the comprehensive plan basis. And these do include 2 recommendations. The recommendation to adopt the code amendments, and also a recommendation to initiate and allocate funds for a more extensive best available science review of the wetland buffers. The proposed code amendments, the changes that you see in your packet from April 3rd include adding including stream to the title of Article 10. It now refers to habitat areas, and that was just as kind of a wayfinding facilitation so that people looking for stream buffers can know where that is from the table of contents. They weren't in the packet, but we did discuss them at the study session back in February. We are proposing essentially flipping the definitions of stream and watercourse, so that previously the code had a complete definition of watercourse. The definition for stream said sea watercourse, but stream is the term that is used more frequently in the code. So rather than sending people on a goose chase of definitions, we thought we would flip those around. And then in the code amendments that were presented on April 3rd, there was one reference to Bothell sponsored in reference to offsite mitigation that hadn't been changed to Bothell approved as we're recommending. So those are really the 3 changes from what you reviewed last time. So with that, I'll open it up to questions from the commission, and then public testimony and deliberations, and then we're hoping tonight to have a motion and vote to approve the Planning Commission findings, conclusions, and recommendations with their attached critical area regulations amendments, with any amendments that you should choose to make tonight. So.
All right, thanks, Dave. Yeah, why don't we start with any questions, like just with Dave's presentation. He did a really good review of some of the things that we brought to his attention last time. And if anybody has any questions with regards to what he said there. And so Dave, I know I was the one who asked about the qualified professionals. So You said that the provision was included in recognition there are qualified professionals working in the field who are not certified. So if a person's certifying a wetland buffer, what kind of credentials do they have to have?
Well, to meet this definition, they would have had to have worked in the field for a period of time, and
In the field of?
wetland biology,
Okay.
wetland or stream biology. Actually, let me get back to that
Okay.
section of the packet. So that'd be 5 years of experience, including preparing wetland reports. So they would have direct experience doing the work that they're getting certified to do, or that they're qualified to do by the code.
Okay. Commissioner Kieran?
And following up on my question from the previous meeting, on the wetland definition, you indicate staff could prepare a director's determination that the language will be interpreted as meaning shall for the purposes of the code. I think particularly since the question's been raised, if we don't act affirmatively, then it makes the language weaker. So I would support making such a determination.
Could you repeat that last part?
Well,
On what page are we on?
we're on page 3 of the memo,
Okay,
where there's discussion about the wetland definition.
got it. Top of the page.
And the last sentence there, if the commission would like to clarify the statement, staff could prepare a director's determination. And I would support preparation of such determination. I think once you raise the question of whether it is or isn't, if you don't act, then you leave that uncertainty there. So I'd close that door.
And that suggestion was added by the director. I brought it to his attention. He basically said that he would, that's how he would interpret that section of the code. But and I think the commission could provide that direction. I don't think we need to add it to the findings, but we can take that as a request and get that determination.
I'd be comfortable with that. Thank you.
Me as well. And just regards to the, I guess, with regards to the professional, is everybody comfortable with the person who's not certified but who's just been in the field? Is that okay with everybody? I don't know what's entailed in certification, but
That's my question, is what deems being certified? I mean, I can spend 10 years doing something, and I'm not certified to physically recommend anything. I guess my question is, what is a certification, and how do they attain it?
I don't have those details. I don't know if you have anything to add, Bruce, but generally with most professional certifications, it requires sitting for an exam, passing an exam and getting certified by the state. I know as an architect, when I came out of architecture school, there were some fairly rigid requirements for what kind of degree you needed to have before you could even sit for and how much experience you needed to have before you could sit for the exam. That was challenged, and the state actually changed the rules to allow qualification for someone who had worked for a certain period of time in the field.
I guess my question would be, if you wanted to build something from drawings that were stamped by a professional engineer or someone who just worked for 5 years, that's kind of where I'm thinking with this thing. I mean, do we want to say you have to be certified in order to give this recommendation? I mean, how many?
Right.
I'm just kind of curious.
yeah, that's kind of what I was going to pose to the commission. I know I got some nods of people who are okay with the way it's written, but it seems like a pretty critical thing that well, no pun intended, that we're trying to certify here, and just because somebody works in a related field on site with something doesn't necessarily mean they might have the scientific know-how to be able to determine whether or not it is a critical area or not, and where the buffers are.
So it's not in a related field, it's in this field, and experience preparing reports, the kinds of reports that we're requiring. So, and it doesn't waive any other requirements that we would have for professional engineers stamp on grading plans if it was a project that required that, or any other professional certifications. It's really just narrowly limited to preparing wetland reports. And I think at the time this language was added, there was an understanding that there were a number of people working in the field that didn't necessarily have certification, but had the kind of relevant experience that,
Okay.
that was.
I guess my question is is that a good reason to have added that language or not? So I don't know. Does anybody else have any more take on that? Did another commissioner?
Yeah, well, and using my experience with certification, which is now several decades old, the experience had to be under the supervision of a licensed or certified person. Would that be the case here? And I'd be a little more comfortable if they were doing it, if that 5 years experience were under the supervision of a certified person.
I believe that's the case, and also that any report, critical areas report that we receive gets peer reviewed. We have a third-party peer reviewer on call with the city, so it will get reviewed by our third-party reviewer who is certified.
Okay, so, yeah.
So I definitely think it's really important that we, have somebody who's qualified, and a certification definitely backs that up. I did briefly look, and there is a program to certify wetland scientists. So there is a program, there's a process, that sort of thing. I just have a question, which is, how much experience does the city have working with a wetland scientist, or, how often does this occur? Do we have any historical information, that sort of thing? But I will just say, these are people that we need to put some amount of trust into, and an extra level of certification and pedigree, I think, would be important. So that's, I support making that a stricter requirement, but.
Yeah. Okay.
If I may,
Bruce.
one of the things that I can tell you is that our development review staff, just about every project we get has some type of a wetland or some type of a critical area regulation function in it. So basically, we are very adept at reading critical area provisions, as well as relying upon our certified third-party review, peer review person. And the city always selects people who are fully qualified. In fact, many years ago, when I was just a lad, I went through the ecology certification program, and it was about a 3 or 4 day event, and I learned how to do it. I'm sure my certification has long since lapsed since I've left that arena, but we do have our staff who do attend those type of trainings when they are offered. And it's been a while since I've heard about a training, but I do know that they do have trainings that they have available for our staff, and they have attended some of them. But we're pretty used to seeing those type of reports.
Are you used to seeing that reports from non-certified professionals?
Usually, and this is kind of a thing that we've noticed over the years, is that in the early days of the critical area regulations, we did receive those type of reports. That has long since been gone past, primarily because if the developer is paying somebody, they want to pay the person who can give them the correct answer. The second part is that they know that it's going to be third-party reviewed. If you give a report that is just not very good at all, the developer is spending a lot of money on this report. He's putting a lot of time into that report because they know for sure that it's going to get kicked back to them. So there's a lot of incentive on the developer's part to make sure it's a good certified wetland biologist. Of course, we want to make sure that it is a certified person. as well as we want to make sure that wetland report is very solid.
You should say, I think you meant to say, we want to make sure it's a qualified person, because our code
Oh,
does
sorry,
allow
sorry,
non.
sorry,
Yeah.
qualified person, yeah, pardon me.
Commissioner Curd.
I can speak from my experience as being a non-qualified professional right now in training as a geologist. There's a little bit of similarity to wetland biology as well. For example, in Snohomish County, in that jurisdiction, I cannot call myself, or I can call myself a geologist, but here in King County, I cannot. And that would just mean that I have to be working, I have to have the stamp from the state, right? And I have to have taken the testing requirements. There's a couple of other hoops to jump through. I feel that a wetland biology or a biologist would be working in a, working with other people to come up with a report if they were inexperienced. And 5 years of experience usually means that they're working with some sort of, in some sort of group setting instead, where their work is being checked by supervisors, that sort of thing. From my perspective here, I think that I'm more comfortable with saying that we can have someone who's been certified, but also with the experience, because if they have 5 years of experience, that usually means that they're working towards, or they've already achieved that, those other criteria that are applied to certification by the state.
So you'd be comfortable with that? Okay, I guess we're getting into deliberation. Sorry about that. Okay, great. Well, we can come back to that a bit later. Thank you for that that good example. That helps me out quite a bit. Thanks, Carson. Was there anything else any other questions with regards to Dave before we, I guess, take public testimony and deliberate? So Dave, would this be the time to just go now? Would we take public testimony before we go through the packet page by page? What would you recommend?
Typically, this would be the time if you don't have other questions of
Okay.
staff, and then you could.
And of course, we can have other questions that come up during the deliberations section, right? For you. Okay. Well, if it's okay with everyone, we'll go ahead and take public testimony at this time for testimony related to the subject that we're doing this evening. It looks like we do have one person in the audience, so please state your name for the record. And since I do know you and you're with the Shorelines Board, feel free to take 3 to 5 minutes. Thanks for all the work that the Shorelines Board has done on the subject. So thank you.
I'm here as an individual.
You're a citizen tonight? Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And there's one for both you and Bruce, or maybe give one to the next. I want just to show, that's just the heading, but I want you to look at the bottom of the page. Is that okay? Is that clear? Ann Guard 16524, 104th Avenue Northeast. I'm here as an individual, but I obviously participated in this decision and the drafting of this. So this is what the Shoreline Board came up with, and I want to show you how easy it is to adopt this to the critical areas outside of shoreline jurisdiction. I highly recommend it to you. It essentially establishes a sequential system whereby you go from step to step to step to decide where the mitigation would take place as you go through, if it cannot take place on site. And you've already seen the diagram. So the first thing I want to say is that there was a statement in the packet about the critical use permit. That would not be applicable to the critical areas outside of the shoreline jurisdiction because the Department of Ecology approves critical use permits.
You mean conditional use permits?
Yes.
Okay.
So that is out anyway. So that would not apply to you. So the second thing is, how would you change the sequencing so that it might be applicable to shorelines, to wetlands outside of shoreline jurisdiction, that you're looking at compensatory mitigation, but also the option now that would be including mitigation banks and fee in lieu. So as we go down this sequence of the mitigation, you can see how easy it is to simply change it. So I showed the first priority would be on.
Oh, Ann, could you move the microphone closer when you're, yeah, that's fine, yeah, great.
Okay, thank you. So if you have to go off-site, that is, outside of the wetland, and there are criteria about when you do go off-site, then the first would be on an adjacent property, and you would just strike what we have put in there, which is shoreline jurisdiction. Then it would be in the same subdrainage basin as the impacted wetlands, so that's your next preference. And I showed what you would strike out in terms of the shoreline jurisdiction. The third one is within the city of Bothell or the municipal urban growth area. Now that one was a little trickier to modify, but I think the idea behind that is that in particular, if you were now into a mitigation bank situation or a fee in lieu, that your preference would be that it would be in the city of Bothell. So that's why it's worded that way, but you might find a better wording if you decide to do this preference system. And the fourth one is in the adjacent jurisdiction, but within the same subdrainage basin. So for example, that could be true for the city of Kenmore, because you could have a wetland that's in the same subdrainage basin as Swamp Creek, for example. Or you could have one, it would be in shoreline jurisdiction, but it could be in the subbasin of the Sammamish River. And that could be true for Woodinville, for example. So this would particularly apply if you would, again, if you were using mitigation banks or fee in lieu. And then finally I showed how you would adapt the diagram that was developed for the regulation for the compensatory mitigation, and essentially that would stay the same except you would strike on the Sammamish River reach out of here. So I highly recommend that you look at this and consider it. I think it gives some real direction to staff as to how you would do off-site compensatory mitigation.
Right.
And one thing I should add also, I do have the Kenmore's, in case you're at all interested, their buffer widths. These were modified considerably.
Oh, we have those already. Dave has given us a.
Well, those are different than the ones that they haven't adopted anything yet. Their planning commission dealt with this last night.
Okay.
And there were late changes as of yesterday by the Department of Ecology. And so I do have those with me if you're interested.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody have any questions for Ms. Agard? Okay, thank you very much for the presentation, and we'll take those recommendations into consideration as we go through the packet.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I'll stay for a little bit if you discuss it, if you've got any other questions.
Okay, thank you. Okay, it looks like there's no public testimony. No one else in the audience to continue that public testimony. So with that, I guess we can go ahead and, oh, Commissioner Hampton. Oh, we can go ahead and deliberate on on the materials that are presented before us. I think maybe we should start by going through page by page, if that's okay. Can I keep the public, is it okay? I mean, if I need to ask further questions to anybody in the audience, if I close the public comment, can I close the public hearing and still ask questions?
If you anticipate asking questions of the public testimony that has been provided, then you would want to keep the public hearing open.
Okay, let's go ahead and keep it open for right now then. So, yeah, let's go ahead and go through some of the pages. I'd like to just kind of fresh on our mind, it might be worth looking at what was presented to us just by Citizen Agard on pages 4 and 5 of a memorandum. And as you can see, the language that we have right here is different than what she recommended. And Dave, can you tell me, is that what you presented to us here, was that what came from the Shorelines Board? Like what?
Yes.
So
what was just presented included some modifications to this to modify what the Shoreline Board is recommending to adapt it to the citywide criticals areas recommendations. Or are you saying that the base
Well, so,
is different?
I'm sorry, so what we were presented in the packet with 4 or 5, the literature on page 4 and 5, and anyway, was that put together after the last Shorelines Board recommendations? And then, so these are additional recommendations on top of what the Shorelines Board recommended? No.
No, this, what was in your packet was what the Shoreline Board is recommending.
Okay.
This is the Shoreline Board recommendation. She's telling us that we should adapt this for the,
Oh, for the camp, okay, for it's not shoreline jurisdiction, okay.
because it's a different.
You're right, okay. Okay, so I guess with that, then looks like we need to go through,
So, just pausing. So,
Yeah, thank you.
in a nutshell, then, the suggestion is that the more restrictive requirements in shorelines be expanded to other critical areas outside of shorelines? Is that a fair summary of what's being proposed, the best you can interpret it?
And as I presented on April 3rd, that what the Shoreline Board is, their point of departure was that it was unlikely that wetlands within the shoreline jurisdiction would be marginal wetlands that could be justified to be filled and mitigated elsewhere. And that if that were to happen, and I think it's going to be a fairly rare situation where it would happen, there should be very strict rules about where that should go. When we go through page by page in the citywide critical areas regulations, we'll see that there are some of those same restrictions, just not as quite as regimented as what the Shoreline Board is recommending. The staff recommendation is that outside of the shoreline jurisdiction, there's a greater likelihood of finding marginal wetlands where and situations where wetlands could significantly impact the developability of a piece of property, where it might be more likely that we would entertain a proposal to fill some wetlands and do off-site mitigation. And I think at the study session, I showed you an example of that. And so we thought that the current regulations, with that one minor change, changing it from Bothell sponsored to Bothell approved, would provide enough guidance for the city where a development could do offsite mitigation that could have a greater beneficial impact. In fact, could be, if we ever establish a wetland mitigation area within our shoreline area, it would be easier for offsite mitigation to be directed to those areas. So that's the reason for our recommendation. And the change in word from Bothell sponsored to Bothell approved is merely that the Bothell sponsored is currently unworkable. We don't have any Bothell sponsored options, and the options that are out there have taken a great deal of time by both the state and the county to establish, and so this change would enable us to use those options that are out there in a situation where the higher priority mitigation options are not feasible. So.
And for point of clarification, is there a definition of what Bothell approved is, or how that process would go?
Basically, it changes it from having to be a program that's sponsored by Bothell to an option that is approved through the administrative development review process.
I understand that's what it says. I'm asking how it would be implemented, I guess. So,
well, it would be an administrative decision through the development review process.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Well, with that, why don't we just go page by page through the proposed critical area regulations amendments. And we'll start with page 1. If anybody has any questions, I think Carson's question was answered with regards to the basement. Yep. Okay, page 2. Page 3.
And on that one, my question about May has been answered, so.
Okay. And page 4. Page 5. Page 6 and 7.
So at the bottom of page 5 and extending onto page 6 was the provision about that allows a non-certified professional with work experience in the field.
So is everybody okay with the language that exists already, 5 years experience? Minimum of 5 years experience in the field?
Actually, it does raise an interesting question. How exactly are we to measure the experience of a non-certified professional?
If it came up as a question, we would ask, essentially, I guess we would ask for their resume showing that they had and if we had doubts, I guess we would follow up with whatever the references were.
I hate to ask, this seems almost hypothetical, and I hate to go down this route, but I'm just going to ask it briefly. If you ever were concerned about somebody's pedigree, resume, certification level, what's the next step?
Well, like I said, we could take steps to verify that, and then, of course, we do the third-party review, and so if the report was not adequate, our reviewer would certainly point out the inadequacies.
And how does that get rectified?
That is through the development review process. We would report back. We would share our third-party review, and there'd have to be a reconciliation between, if there are disputes between those.
So the city is not reviewing or approving the professional who is selected to prepare the report. They're making the decision on the final product itself.
That's ultimately the more important part. If we didn't feel that we could deem an application with a wetland report that was clearly done by someone who didn't meet our definition of a qualified professional, we could say that it's not complete, or we could say that in our initial review that it didn't meet that code requirement, and that they would need to make that correction. Yeah.
Is there any way we can put verbiage in there, say, preparation by a City of Bothell approved qualified professional? Where I don't know if that would.
I like that. I mean, anybody else have any comments on that?
It goes back to kind of piggyback on your comment. Do you approve the individual prior? So if somebody reads this saying, I have to get a City of Bothell approved qualified individual if they don't have certification, so they would have to come to you first and say, is this okay?
Okay. Okay. Commissioner Hampton?
I guess I'm just wondering, I mean, I think it's really good to look at these things and think it through, but is there a problem we're trying to solve? Have we had any issues with professional biologist
Not that I'm
presenting work that isn't sufficient for our needs? I mean, there's a lot of people in fields that don't have the qualifications, but the certifications, but do have the qualifications, and I think the fewer barriers we put to people to be able to do their job and do a good job, as long as there's not already a problem, then let's leave it as it is. But that's just my thought.
I'm going to just go ahead and appreciate what Commissioner Hampton said, but I'm going to ask a brief question, which is, does anywhere else in the code reference qualified professionals?
Yes, there are numerous places where we do that.
And is the verbiage similar to the verbiage that's presented here tonight? Or is it more strict, for instance, like only looking for certified professionals?
I'd have to do a little research on that. I know that for tree retention plans, we allow a number of different types of professionals: certified arborist, nurserymen, Bruce, help me out here, other landscape architects.
We do allow landscape architects, yes.
So I think it varies with the situation. This was language that was deemed appropriate at the time it was added to the code. It hasn't been an issue. It was just a question that came up in your review. I don't see any particular problem with either adding the Bothell approved non-certified professional with the stipulated experience, or even striking that altogether. It may be that was more of an issue when these requirements were fairly new and there just weren't a lot of certified professionals. I don't think it would be a major problem if we struck it, but I also think it's our recommendation would be that the code language as it is working fine.
So, I appreciate what Commissioner Hampton said. What problem are we trying to solve? But I mean, there's part of me that just has this uncomfortable feeling that one day we're going to wake up and something bad is going to happen, and we could have prevented it by requiring someone with a little bit more certification level. I think just doing the Bothell approved verbiage is fair. I am kind of hung up on it, but I think I'm willing to move on and leave it as is, but it just feels like these are critical areas. Like, I would hate to find a situation in which a person with maybe just somebody who's not qualified makes a decision that somehow makes it through. That's bad for the critical area.
Well, again, we have the next safeguard of the third-party review, so.
Okay.
I think there are risks with Bothell approved as well, because then the city needs to have a process by which it determines whether someone is qualified or not, independent of the certification process. So that just makes me a little nervous, and when the city then approves an individual, it almost gives that individual a degree of status, which wasn't otherwise there. So
Yeah, I think on that.
makes me a little nervous.
And sorry, because I know I'm the one who probably started this ball rolling, but there's a reason I guess I did. And but so I guess for me, it's either we leave the language as it is because there's not one, and we've heard. But I personally would be more comfortable with a certified professional, because I think it just takes any kind of gray area out of it. But so maybe we'll just take. I mean, with that, we can just maybe we'll just say as it stands right here, or a certification in there. So is there anybody else who's in favor of a certification or just leaving as it is?
Well, so I think we're in. I think maybe we should just move on in the deliberations, and when we get to motions, I may make a motion just to strike the non-certified area altogether.
Okay. Okay.
And just process-wise, I think it would be fine to make those kind of motions as we go through the page-by-page review, or save them for the end, either way.
Well, then I'm going to go ahead and just move forward with the motion then to, and this is kind of to test the water, so we'll see how this goes. On page 4, section 1404-520, bullet point A, I'd like to remove the section after "or a non-certified professional wetland scientist."
So you'd like to remove that section,
The remainder of that
everything
sentence.
after scientist,
Yes,
the first.
Second on the motion?
period.
I second that.
Okay, so all those in favor of the motion, say aye.
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 Opposed?
Nay.
Abstain?
Abstain.
Okay, the motion carries. So of the recommendation to strike that language.
Can I make a comment?
Yes.
So I think that one of the issues with a lot of these professional certification programs is that they kind of play favoritism to those with means and with privilege. And we have a lot of people who are young, graduating, having a tough time to establish their roots in this community. And to put another burden on them other than just being competent and capable of doing their job is going to affect some people disproportionately than others. And so I think that that's unfair, but that's why I said no.
Okay, thank you. And please note that, Dave, to council when you give the recommendation. I think that's actually a good thing to note for them to kind of ponder over.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay. Pages 6 or 7.
And these were, or at least 7 was all just for context, no
Okay.
change proposed.
8 and 9.
Same there. And then on page 9,
Those are things we're going to probably be recommending to revisit in the near future.
well, what we're proposing here is to make the changes to incorporate the new habitat score
Correct.
within our existing buffer table, and then recommend revisiting the buffer widths when we are able to do best available science review.
Now, so is there any kind of statute, so like when we're approving this now, these amendments, is there a certain time frame for which we can't go back and review this? Is there like you have to wait like a year or 2 years or anything like that before council, okay.
No. If a private private individual requests a code amendment and it's not approved, then they can't bring that same request back within 5 years, but.
Okay. Oh, excellent. Thank you.
Well, in the context of the recommendation that we recommend the council initiate and allocate funds for the update of the buffers, I'd support this. I'd be a little concerned about letting it lie without that, but given that recommendation, I'm comfortable with that page.
Agreed. Okay, page 10 and 11. 12 and 13. So there's a note there in the box. I think we kind of agreed as a commission to not, we wanted to wait for a more comprehensive review because we didn't want to pick and choose one or the other.
Right.
Agreed.
Okay. Okay. So we'll just keep that as it is. Okay, 14, pages 14 and 15. So this was the thing that the citizen brought forward earlier with regards to some of the things that the Shorelines Board talked about. Are we, I guess, if people want to discuss whether they're comfortable or uncomfortable with any parts of this, because, yes, Commissioner
Well,
Karen.
on a kind of high level here, I can appreciate that, or in my opinion, I think it would be better to have larger, higher quality wetlands than to preserve small isolated chunks. I think particularly if there are no corridors between them, I think from a habitat standpoint, preserving a small chunk either on or adjacent to would have less habitat value than mitigating in an area that we're actually expanding and making a higher quality wetland. So that's one thought there. I also appreciate staff's point that you don't have to look too hard in Western Washington to find little bits of wetland everywhere. And if we are too rigorous about maintaining those little bits, which may have minimal habitat value, we're really going to choke the ability to develop a whole lot of property. So I'm inclined to go with the way it's written.
Okay. Anybody else have any comments with regards to the mitigation sections? Which is actually, we can just say 14, 15, 16, 17, and 18.
If I could ask Ms. Agard a question, would you mind? Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, thanks for coming back to the plate for me, and appreciate your, thanks. I appreciate your time and input on this. And my question is, you had some redactions from the Shoreline Board recommendation as a recommendation for a critical area zone. Are you,
Dave, I think you took mine that I put up here. Thank you. No, the foldback copy. Oh, sorry. Thank you. So what's your question?
are you suggesting that your redacted version of the shoreline recommendation be added to the end of the compensatory mitigation requirements?
No,
Or replace
I want
them?
to stress, first of all, this doesn't have anything to do with preserving small or large wetlands. This is simply compensatory mitigation means that when you have decided that you cannot mitigate it through the sequencing. You
I
know, when
understand
you
that,
say
yeah.
First enhance, then minimize, and so
Right.
forth and so on. So this this is only when you get to the point where you're going to do compensatory mitigation. So what you're saying is, where would this fit in?
Yeah, I think you just answered my question. Yeah, thank you.
So it would basically fit in to the page 16, where yours says you're approved, where you've changed the wording approved. So you start at it's type and location of mitigation. So here we're down to compensatory down there. And now you go over to 16, and where it says where type and location of mitigation, then you put in where it says type of mitigation, simply because, take that out of there so it doesn't confuse it. There's a second section for location. We've just divided it into two. We've said there's a type. It says the lost wetland and out of kind. So we've got two sections there. And then location is where we have basically expanded under page 16. So this would all fit in to those paragraphs 1, 2, and 3.
On page 16.
Yeah. And you will also notice in your packet, when Dave, I did not include it in this because I didn't make any changes, but when Dave added into your packet what the shoreline board did, you will see we have a whole definition of what mitigation banking means and in lieu of fee.
Are you speaking for the Shoreline Board now, or for your?
Well, I'm speaking only because of what they did. So this is a recommendation that will go to council.
Right.
So in the packet on page 7, this is the first page 7, when Dave included what the Shoreline Board did, we added this definition of mitigation banking and fee in lieu. Well, actually, we did two things. We added an actual definition of what fee in lieu means, which you don't have, but we added it into the definitions system of definitions. And then we outlined how you use the credits for fee in lieu and how you use the credits for mitigation banking. You don't have any of that, and I would recommend that you put it in if you decided to go with what we recommended, because this is not included in yours. All you're doing is changing one word.
Okay, I think you've answered my question, and I thank you for
Make it
that.
clear? Okay. So, okay.
Thank you. So yeah, it sounds like, that might entail quite a bit of reworking of the words if we want to delve into this.
I think maybe this would help. The proposal would be to take section 1404-540D and replace that with what has been provided here, sections 4 and 5 from the Shoreline Code, Shoreline Board recommendations with the modifications shown.
Okay. Type and location of mitigation, Part D. That whole Part D would be replacing what you've given us with what the Shoreline Board decided.
So it would require some renumbering and, but.
Right. Is there any thoughts on that with the commission? I don't know if anybody's had enough time to digest. It's kind of a lot to look at.
Can I ask, what happens if we don't do this tonight? What is the next step for the Shoreline Board's recommendations?
Shoreline Board recommendations are going forward to council. There'll be a study session on May 7th. 17th?
Study session. the
On May 14th, sorry. I knew that wasn't right. And public hearing on June 4th is the plan for that. These are not, as we've discussed before, they're related, but they're not necessarily tied at the hip. And we're not planning to take the critical areas regulations for approval with the Shoreline Board. We're going to report on what your recommendation is if you've reached one when we go to the study session, or where you're at in the process. But the main reason we wanted to have an opportunity for some coordination between the two, and that's happened mostly in the references where we're borrowing from the changes that the Shoreline Board and our consultants have made in the Shoreline Code.
So if we do nothing tonight, on June 4th, the council will vote on a similar documentation, rules change for the Shoreline Board recommendations.
And critical areas, or well, separate from the critical areas, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
So June 4th will be shoreline, some other date will be critical areas.
We're planning to take the critical areas recommendations to council in July.
So the advantage to us doing this tonight is it shows some amount of, say, solidarity with the Shoreline Board's recommendations.
You mean the advantage of?
Sorry, if we integrate these changes, it shows some amount of solidarity with the Shoreline Board.
I guess.
Because I feel like
I wouldn't put as solidarity with the board, but with consistency with their requirements. And I guess the point that I've tried to make is consistency is good to a point, but there are also they're addressing different issues to some degree, and that's why we've made different recommendations.
I'm going to say just out loud, like it feels like on June 5th we may be in a place where both of these are done. Both of these are adopted by the City Council. June 5th.
No. When you say both of these, critical areas and
Sorry. Yes. Yes.
No, we do not anticipate council adopting critical areas regulations together with the shoreline.
Okay, so sometime in the near
July is what we're anticipating.
end of summer, that will occur. Got it.
Certainly before the August break, I think.
Okay. And then I'm talking a lot, so I'm going to try to wrap that up. I really do appreciate Anna Agard coming here twice, and I do really appreciate the work that she does. I also do appreciate the changes here. I'm somewhat inclined rolling them in. I'm also wondering what we're buying ourselves by doing it. So I'm not going to say I'm pro either way. But that's where I'm at.
Because basically you have, what you have, because some people have just got this and are probably digesting it, I was able to sit through 2 Shorelines Board meetings. You basically have a theory that you keep, if somebody's doing mitigation, you try to keep it on site, even if it's, and then if there's kind of like a compensatory, you also try to keep that as close to the area as possible, correct? Rather than in some mitigation bank somewhere. So it's kind of I think they both make sense to me. So it's, I don't know. So do they kind of both make sense to you as well? I don't know. That's what I'm. So maybe.
Well, I hear that. I do think there's a difference between the shorelines, which are extremely sensitive, and are larger continuous areas, and sensitive areas, which may be scattered throughout or are scattered throughout the city. I just, I'm struggling with the habitat value of some of these smaller pieces and even moving them around. I just, and my background is wetland biology. Okay, that's my undergraduate degree. I've done a lot of work in it. I'm an environmental engineer. But I look at some of the bigger constructed wetlands around the UW Bothell campus, around the North Creek Business Park, and I think those are much more valuable habitats than some small pieces scattered around. So I'd be concerned about putting a lot of effort in those pieces when we might get a bigger bang for our wetland buck in aggregating them. That's what I'm struggling with.
Okay,
I agree with him, but he's a wetland biologist, so I'm just going to let him talk for me.
I haven't been a wetland biologist for over 30 years.
I just said it on record, you are.
so,
And the other thought, well, no, this is not on the biological standpoint. This is, I'd be reluctant to move forward with incorporating these tonight without staff going back and analyzing it and telling us what the impact would be. It just seems like a pretty big potential impact on development and economy without getting a little more feedback.
I mean, one option we could do here is just approve the recommendations that staff gave us, and also with the note saying we also appreciated very much what Shorelines Board did, and it may be a little bit separate but similar. So council knows they could choose to integrate in what Shorelines Board did for all the critical areas. Or this could be given further consideration when we do the buffer widths in 2020 or whatever it is. We could also revisit it then as well. So, let's just see where we're at, because I think it's there is a little bit of, I guess you could work a few parts of this in with what staff recommended, but who's comfortable with what staff recommended? Is it, or are you more comfortable with what something similar to what Shorelines Board?
Should we go through the rest and then make this
I
discussion?
think we're almost, yeah, we can. I think we're almost
I think
done.
there's 3 or 4 more pages.
Okay. Well, let's, okay, we'll continue through, and then just don't let me forget that one. It's the big one. Okay. So, all right. So let's move to pages 16 and 17. And 18 and 19. Okay. I think with that, maybe we'll, a motion to close the public hearing.
I want to thank Ms. Agard first. Thanks for talking twice to us. Appreciate it. And I move to close the public hearing.
Seconded.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries unanimously. The Commissioner Cabe absent and excused. Okay, so with that, we've moved through all of these parts of the findings. Is this a good time to revisit some of the things that we need to clarify? Did we want to clarify it all? Or I guess that would be an amendment to a motion to approve.
So, a question for staff. So, there is not, I'm inferring from the schedule you talked about earlier, there's not a driving need to approve this tonight. I mean, it's good to close things and move on, but we're not driven to do something tonight.
Yeah, there's no deadline. I would say that if you choose to continue it, to continue your deliberations, having closed the public hearing, I would, I think the earliest that we could bring it back would be May 15th, which would be a bit of a push. So it might not be until the first meeting in June 5th.
So if we were to ask you to look at this proposal and let us know what the implications are, is that something that could be done by May 15th and then allow us to deliberate and act in time for the goal of completing it before the August break?
I think that's still would be doable even if you didn't make your recommendation until June 5th. My preference would be, and I mean, I can give I think a pretty good sense of the implications. It would create more restrictions on offsite mitigation, but understanding that already the code gives priority to on-site mitigation. It allows offsite mitigation only when there are no reasonable on-site or in sub-basin opportunities. 2, when offsite mitigation has a greater likelihood of providing equal or improved wetland functions. And 3, that those locations shall be in the same sub-basin with a few, with 4 conditions where we could go beyond the sub-basin. So, and that would give us, for example, the opportunity to use the existing wetland mitigation, King County approved mitigation bank that is in the Sammamish River Basin, but not in our existing sub-basin. So,
Is there any negative if we approve this tonight? The amendments?
Which
Sorry, the
proposed amendment?
The recommendations for the shoreline boards, sections, replacing sections D and E? Nope, it's just section D with the section provided by Ms. Agard.
I would say just that it would provide somewhat less flexibility for offsite mitigation outside of the shoreline jurisdiction, or citywide.
I know, yeah. I'd love to try to wrap this up tonight. I think just being cognizant of staff's time and it would be, I think we should try to wrap this up tonight. Commissioner Hampton?
I agree. I think we can get through this tonight. I feel like we have a good council that's going to review this, and they're likely going to hear from Ms. Agard as well, particularly from the shoreline board aspect of their work. I think that there's a lot of opportunities in this city to do restoration of degraded wetlands, and this in lieu program, offsite restoration, would allow that to happen. There's a lot of degraded wetlands that aren't being, they're not being restored now, and if we could get down there and do like what we did at the UW Bothell, we'd provide a lot more ecological function for the drainage basin and for the larger wetland. So I'd be in favor of keeping something that's more flexible, particularly with Dave Boyd's comments about how this first tries to get people to do the work on site.
Okay, but you were saying you wanted to try to keep that the mitigation work within the city?
I'm in favor of leaving this as a staff recommendation and sending it to council for them to make a decision.
Okay. I'd also be in support of that. It seems like that's Commissioner Curd or Peter. I know I think so. Maybe we could say, with the recommendation that you also look at what the shoreline board did, and it's also, there's also a way there to keep it in this. I think they both have good benefits to them. I don't think one's obvious to me over the other.
We will certainly be addressing this. This will be entered into the public record. In fact, this would be Exhibit 1 to the public record. So we'll go to council and we will address this and do a more thorough analysis than I just did on the spot here with our presentation to.
Great, and we do have the liaison here with Deputy Mayor Dewar, so she's been here for that, so she's heard this discussion, so. Okay, well with that, does somebody have a recommendation? Yes.
I just want to say for the record, it doesn't sound like there's a big support behind integrating this tonight. And in a way, I'm okay with that because I always want citizen feedback, and I really appreciate any citizen who comes down here for an hour and 14 minutes and sits with us. And no doubt Ann has spent countless hours outside of this meeting preparing for this. There's definitely part of me that feels like, I would be concerned about missing an opportunity to protect the sensitive areas. I want to say just clearly that I somewhat disagree with the importance of protecting smaller wetlands throughout the city. But I'm not going to push it any further. I do agree that I think the council's going to do the right thing, so I'm not really inclined to make this a longer topic. I could drag it out longer if you guys want. So yeah, I think we should just move forward with the staff recommendation and go from there. I'm going to step back.
And I also, have this in the context of the second recommendation here, that the city council initiate and allocate funds for a more extensive update of the critical area regulations, including best available science. I think this is something that can and should be, revisited at that point.
And just with that, on the recommendations on attachment 1, it says, including best available science review of the wetland buffers. The only problem I have with that whole statement is it leaves it kind of open-ended. It doesn't give any kind of recommendation so I was thinking maybe in 2020 or something like that. I was wondering if we should, that gives us kind of a year at least.
Where are you?
Sorry, in
the findings?
Yeah, the findings, sorry, the recommendations on the findings. Part 2. It just kind of, it doesn't really give any guidance as to what year to take that on.
So we can certainly make amendments to the findings as drafted, so.
Random concern. What if we couldn't fund it in 2020? There is budgetary concerns in the city, so are we shortchanging ourselves, and would a better verbiage be as soon as possible?
Or we could just leave it as it is.
I appreciate the sentiment in 2020. I'm just afraid it just couldn't happen in 2020. And then are we locking ourselves in? So
This is just a recommendation to council. They'll
Okay.
determine when it can happen. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, great. Okay, and with that, I'll go ahead and, we'll go ahead and close discussion and entertain a motion.
to be clear, all amendments have been captured in the Word document displayed up on the screen.
Well,
All changes that we made in addition to what was presented. Because I think we made
the only one that
Was the certification one?
certification, yeah.
striking the non-certified professional language, and I wasn't entirely clear that we had actually that there had been a majority agreement on that.
Yeah, it was 4 in favor, 1
Okay.
opposed, 1 abstention.
Okay.
With the comment from Commissioner Hampton too, which I think is justified too. But- Okay, so we'll see, motion to approve the findings. And you can find,
The findings include the recommendation.
you can put, yeah, I'm looking for the recommendation language. Okay, we'll go ahead and make a motion. Does anybody wants to?
Yeah, I would move we adopt it as proposed and the findings, conclusions, and recommendations as in the packet.
With the amendment that was captured.
With the amendment.
Seconded.
Okay, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstention? Okay, motion carries unanimously. Commissioners Cabe absent and excused. And with that, we move on to, looks like we have a report from Senior Planner Bruce Blackburn on a briefing of the Canyon Park Regional Growth Center and Sub-Area Plan.
Wow, thank you, Dave. This, of course, is a briefing to the commission, so we don't have to make any motions or anything like that. And the other thing is, too, is that this is going to be a free dialogue. As I'm blasting through this 2.5 years of work, I want you guys to ask questions and say, wait, hold it, we didn't get that quite as well. So please do not hesitate to interrupt me. First of all, I want to tell you about an open house scoping meeting we are having on the Canyon Park Subarea Update Plan, and that is on Thursday, April 25th from 4 to 6:30 p.m. at the Canyon Hills Community Church. And that's basically within the Canyon Park sub-area, within the area. And they're at 22027 17th Avenue Southeast. And I want to also identify a couple of areas. One is, of course, the Canyon Park Visioning webpage, which has got some great information on it, as well as we are accepting survey information. We've got basically about a 7.5 to 8 minute survey that we have set up that we want people to give us input. We've got about 150 some odd responses so far, so it's being very successful. I encourage everybody to do that. So that's my first plug of the evening.
How many responses?
We got about 150-ish,
Okay.
a little over 150. So we're really happy about that. We want more. We always want more. Of course, as you are familiar, or maybe not so familiar, but basically this is, of course, the Canyon Park area, and it is within a regional area that's identified by the Puget Sound Regional Council as a regional growth center. And there are 29 regional growth centers within the Puget Sound region, of which Canyon Park is one of them. It is one of 6 activity centers within the city of Bothell, which is identified here. And of course, the Canyon Park area is identified as blue and is even further defined as the sub-area. Now, one of the things that we have that we're looking at is we have about 4 different boundaries within this map on the right-hand side. One, of course, is a study area. We're looking at a much larger area than you would ordinarily do with a sub-area plan update because we have to do an environmental review. We want to make sure we capture that accurately. The other, of course, is we have the sub-area plan, which is basically outlined in the blue color. The other is that we have the regional growth center, which is within that sub-area plan. And finally, we have the Canyon Park Business Park, which is within that designation. So we have a bunch of boundaries here. From our intents and basically our purposes, we don't really want to take too much pay a lot of attention to that boundary, except that it does have a few connotations as we get through some of these processes. So questions? Yes.
Point of clarification.
Yes.
The potential additional study area at the very top
Yes.
is not within the city of Bothell?
It's not in the city of Bothell currently. It is within our MUGA, basically our planning area, our future planning area. And one of the things that we want to do is we want to take a look at that area because it is so linked to the Canyon Park area. We want to do at least the environmental analysis on that, and that's why we went ahead and included that area. So first of all, this is a very important area for the council. This is a council goal to do an update to this area. And in that effect, we have done about 2.5 years of work on it. First of all was crafting a vision for the area in which we've got a bunch of stakeholders together that live and work and own property within the Canyon Park area to set up an aspirational vision. And essentially what those stakeholders identified is that they said, look, we want this to continue to be an economic driver. The businesses, the employment out here are really important, not just for the city, but for the region as well. We also want to make sure this is a multifaceted neighborhood. One of the things we learned is that employees today really like the more urban style, the more active, the more entertainment type of a living situation, as well as have a lot more housing, a lot of diversity in housing, so we don't miss people that maybe can't afford necessarily to live in one of the larger single-family residential areas. And we want to have this to serve both Bothell residents and employees that come throughout the region. One of the real key features is connect this area to the natural environment. Canyon Park has got a bunch of really awesome nature areas. The North Creek, a bunch of small tributaries in North Creek, some wetlands, some of those things, as well as a lot of interconnected trails that lead you through those areas. And that is a feature that was identified very strongly. Finally, transportation. And of course, you know won't be any surprise to you that transportation is a very important feature within this area. And in fact, one of the things that the folks have identified is they want this to become a hub for transportation so that you can get in and out of the Canyon Park area reasonably quickly, and reasonable is the term, but better than we can now, and offer different types of transportation options. And I'm going to get a little bit into that later on. As far as an economic driver goes, this area's got a lot of really, really important employers out there, some fantastic companies that we're just really excited to have in the city of Bothell. One of the interesting things about it as we got into this is we learned that there is a very strong component of manufacturing in that, as well as professional, scientific, and technical services. This area is within what's called the Biomedical Device Innovation Zone, and it's a state-sanctioned zone that includes a bunch of really key people: Philips, Fuji Sonosite, Seattle Genetics, a lot of really important life science folks. Interestingly enough, we have quite a mix of land uses. This is, of course, our land use chart where we've identified different types of things: manufacturing, office, some of the other areas, and you've got a lot of different colors up there. It's a very fascinating map when we put this together. And finally, we know that we're going to have more jobs coming into this area. And this is a slide from, of course, our Vision 2050 stuff. And this is basically showing the jobs within the Puget Sound region as well as what will be happening in the future. So we have to plan for additional jobs. That's a really important item. Some of the other elements of the economic driver is that these are some of the manufacturing, accommodation, real estate, all kinds of different trades. Now, these are 2017 numbers. We actually believe we're more like, at the total down there, we're more like closer to probably about 11,000, maybe 11,500. So we have been seeing extremely high numbers of growth in that area. Interestingly enough, we have a lot of square footage out there. And this kind of shows you the different square footages by kind of like real estate type, as they call it: flex office, retail, industrial, and some other kind of a mix that you couldn't really identify. There's like 5,500,500 square feet of space out there, so it's quite a bit of space. But we do have some space for some others. One of the things we want to do for this multifaceted neighborhood is move some of that undeveloped land, which is the red area down there, up into the areas that we kind of want to have, including manufacturing, multifamily housing, and commercial trade and services. One of the things that we keep identifying in housing, and this is a theme you're going to hear us talk about, was that missing middle type of housing. Okay, yeah, we've got the affordable housing, which is really critical, but we've got this gap in the middle there that is not getting affordable, is not having housing. We want to make sure we have some mechanism to get them to have the type of place to live where they can be close to the area. Oh, yes.
Can you clarify if undeveloped land is equivalent to undeveloped parcels, or is it just undeveloped land on existing parcels where buildings may exist?
No, it's undeveloped. There's not a building on the site. Basically, one of the things that's interesting is about undeveloped land is it's something that you could put a building on real quickly instead of having to tear it down a redevelopment type of a scenario. So we're kind of counting that. There's a lot of land out there that has that ability, so it's pretty important. One of the other features that I want to again kind of emphasize is the need for amenities in the area: restaurants, services, entertainment. That was really identified by the employers as well as the employees that we want to have coming out there.
Just because we had a side question.
Good.
If I was to walk out there right now, I've seen lots of parking lots and grass areas around the buildings there. Are those part of that undeveloped land, or?
Some of it is.
Okay.
And basically the idea is that there are some areas where there's some excess areas, we'll call it. And okay, hey, look, you could put something there very easily by doing some type of a parking structure. Okay. So one of the things that has happened here is that this is one of those really sophisticated things that we do all the time. It's really fun, but we have fun with these things. Interestingly enough, we always have to look at the market and what the market is doing, particularly in vacancy rate for retails and flexes and things like that. We also want to look at the rental rate, the square foot rental areas. And you want to look at your kind of the growth over the past few years. This one actually shows 5 years. That basically shows there is some growth in the fees that are charged per square feet. So that is a promising sign that there is the ability to do some of that work out here. One of the other features about this multifaceted neighborhood is that we've got to add some residential. This is basically the bottom chart there is showing the the people we believe are going to be coming in for the next 50 or so years. And this also kind of shows some of the really extraordinary features within this area. We have way wide diversity of housing, not housing, but businesses and geomorphology and all these things that kind of are really fun to look there. You know, both the critical areas, some steep slopes, just about everything you'd want to have is in this area. So it makes it very interesting. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I've always been intrigued by the possibility of putting residential in more industrial areas. But I know one of the problems, there's the conflict of the businesses to be able to operate and do things 24/7 possibly that wouldn't be compatible with residential. So obviously that's something you're looking at. So in short, like what are some kind of interesting things that you think could be done to provide multifamily or this kind of missing middle housing integrated in with businesses?
Well, it's kind of interesting because we've been watching some of the examples that are happening around the country where you do have some of these type of more industrial activities locating really close to or right actually within the same building as residential. It's just a matter of how you separate them. And I think that there's much more acceptance for that style of life, particularly when you talk about these young folks. They really seem to like the idea of a really active neighborhood that has a lot of these different types of land uses within it and adds basically variety to the life. So we think that is something that can be addressed, and we think it's actually in some ways an amenity to the area. So it's a good point.
Thank you.
You bet. And of course, I mentioned the natural environment. We have about 250 acres of wetlands, streams, and buffers of different types out here. We have great connection to those areas. It's about 14% of the area, which is pretty large for a regional growth area. This is, again, something that was identified as really important to the stakeholders. They really enjoy that feature. The visual green, the visual softening of the built environment was really identified as something that was really fun for them. One of the things that we can go out there is as you go through this area, you find all kinds of really awesome things, streams, wetlands, as well as trails that go through those areas. In fact, some of the trails through there are very popular. This is actually a photograph of the North Creek Trail. But you go out there on almost any day and there's lots of people going back and forth in this area. It's really an important feature. We want to emphasize that as we go through this. Transportation, big deal. As you can see here, this is, of course, the map of the city of Bothell and some of the major roadway sections we have in the city. You can see that the Canyon Park area has a whole bunch of those transportation corridors running through it, 405, 527, 524, which is to the north, as well as 228th Street. So it has a lot of transportation options there. That also brings some issues because you get a lot of transportation traffic within those areas. This is a 2016 numbers right here that basically shows there's a lot of vehicles using Interstate 405, the 527, as well as some of these other roadways. This is average daily traffic in the area. One of the other features that we're going to be looking into as we continue with this discussion is that the roadways that are, well, that looks a weird color. The light colored roadways up there are essentially private drives, and these are not public right-of-ways within the business park. What that means is that we need to work with the business park, and we have had discussions about what it was going to take to, one, turn these over to the city eventually, or two, make modifications to some of the configuration of those roadways. So that's really important. These are kind of mega blocks, you know, you have really big blocks. We want to make the blocks a little bit smaller through the urban design kind of a concept to improve pedestrian walkability. You know, that's a big feature right there, and we want to have that kind of discussion, and we're well on the way on doing that. One of the other features about transportation that's interesting.
Can I ask a question?
Oh, yes.
About the super blocks?
Yes.
Is your idea of kind of making them smaller or seem smaller about putting more roads in or more public pathways for people to be able to walk and bike through there?
Yeah, that's one of the features that we actually are looking for some input from the community on. And that's one of the questions within the survey is, what do you want to do walking, how much you want to do biking? We think that there's probably going to be room for both. We'll probably have some additional vehicle travel ways as well as a lot more pedestrian and bike-oriented facilities. In fact, I'm going to talk a little bit more about some bike stuff in just a few minutes, but yeah, it's a good question.
Okay, thanks.
You bet.
But on the transportation
Yes.
element, there are only 3 ingress-egress points in this, and it's quite challenging. And they are emptying onto very busy roads, which you show on the traffic there.
Yes.
One of the challenges that routinely happens with growth is we plan for the roads later, and then they don't get in. So I would really urge that if there are going to be more connections made, for instance, to the north, I think was raised, that come early rather than late. And also on the transit side, we have a shortage of park and ride spots around here. I urge that be considered here as well, if we're bringing people in or bringing people out.
Yeah, in fact, actually, you just touched on a couple of really interesting items that we do need to definitely talk about because, as you identified, there's only 3 ingress-egress points to this area. And anyway, from about 3:30 in the afternoon until about 6 o'clock in the afternoon, it's a real adventure getting in and out of there. We actually are looking at some other mechanisms to go out, but that's a really tough thing to do because you got to have the right spot. One of the other features, and it's a plus and it's also a tough thing to deal with is the natural areas, the wetlands. You just can't, there's a nice flat space, we'll just go there, no, it's a wetland. You're not going to go do that. So that adds some challenges as well. So yeah, those are good features and those are definitely going to be points that we're going to have a lot of discussions about.
Yeah, I think the south is very challenging because that stretch along 228th is wetland.
It is.
And I don't see that being crossed, so.
Very unlikely, yeah. And actually, one of the areas that has been always identified is the area that's behind the Fred Meyer. And if you go around the back of that, you're going to look at all that open space there. Well, it's all a huge wetland complex. And that's been identified. Well, we could put a road. No, you're not going to put a road there. You're going to have to do it another way. So there's a lot of those kind of items that we're going to have to really have some serious discussion. And speaking of the park and ride, there it is. One of the things that we found really interesting as we were going through this is how many people come from the north area and how many people are not that far away from Canyon Park. They're not coming, dozens and dozens of miles. They're coming within sometimes 10 to maybe even less miles. So that lends itself well to transit type options as well, some of the other multimodal things. And when we first saw this, we said, oh, well, that's amazing. And so we found it really amazing. One of the things that's kind of cool about this park and ride is it's about 304, 306, something like that stalls. And that is so heavily used, as all park and rides are. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about this, but this feature right there, you can see how it's got a big bridge that goes over 405 and then goes out. That's going to be amended eventually, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that too, so we can have some discussion about that. You identified transit. That's a real key feature of all of our efforts here to try and get transit to be used much more effectively. We have a brand new Swift line, green line that started March 24th, and we're really excited about it. In fact, yesterday I was out and I was watching the bus drivers practice to drive, to go back and forth, and it was kind of fun to watch them do that. These are some of the boarding numbers that we've got going up there, and you can see there's a lot of boardings going on around the park and ride area. Not as many once you get into the park itself, but that's that you're going to hear a lot when we start talking about first to last mile kind of a thing where, okay, yeah, I can get to the park and ride, no problem. I can get to, down to the hill, no problem, but I got another, 3/4 of a mile to go. How am I going to do that? And I'll just identify this right now. We're looking at Lime scooters. We want to talk to the Lime scooter folks, and we're going to have some discussion with the council about that later on. What about maybe some Lime scooters out here? So, there's all kinds of really innovative things that we can kind of look into and start exploring as we go through this process, which is very interesting and fun. I also identify, of course, we know Sound Transit 3, and basically the bus rapid transit system that will be placed on Interstate 405, as well as, of course, 522. I apologize for that map. It's really fuzzy, and I've got to find a better one. But basically, it kind of shows the overall system that goes up to Everett, to Redmond, basically goes through. This is, of course, a long ways in the future, but we are hoping that the BRT along 405 will be happening here pretty soon, depending upon what happens with this project. This is kind of one of those feature projects in the area. This right here, of course, is the park and ride. Right up there. I'm going to use the pointer, but that's not going to help you any. But you can see basically where the park and ride is. This is a new project that is being designed right now by Washington State Department of Transportation that would extend the express toll lanes, or ETLs, northward through the city of Bothell up to this point. You would have a fly-up ramp that would come up from that area. The buses would stop at that, basically the stop line there, and will go into the park that way. This is how the BRT lines are going to be accommodated. This is a real major project. You know, you hear all kinds of different figures thrown out, but it's numbers that, you know, I can't even hardly fathom. This is a project that we're working really closely with the Owners Association of the business park on, because we're going to have their cooperation on turn over some of the roadways eventually to this, to accommodate this project. I don't want to leave this up there too long, but this is a key component of taking care of a lot of those transportation issues we've got going on.
Bruce, obviously you coordinate with the business or landowners in that area. What part of that is really affected much by additional input needed by landowners?
Well, let's look at this map. Basically, and again, this is not as great a map as you might want to, but basically to the park and ride lot right there, you can see they're going to add some additional lane width to that feature to get it through 17th Avenue Southeast, which is currently a private drive within the business park, out to the 527 area. And what you're looking at is you're looking at some pretty significant lane additions, frankly, to improve the left and the right turns and to come in and out of there. This is really early in the stage. We're still going through some of the analysis on this, but this is basically the concept design that WashDOT has put out to the public so that the public can start reacting to it. The green feature area there is basically an additional shared use path, bikes and pedestrians and those types of things that we want to have that connect out to the North Creek Trail within the park. So you can see what happens is we go from the off-ramp down to 17th Avenue past the park and ride, and then into the park itself toward 220th Street. Now, 220th is a major east-west thoroughfare within the park area. This is a discussion that we're ongoing with the owners and WashDOT and our transit agencies, and there's been a lot of different meetings, a lot of different discussion, a lot of thought as to what is the best way to approach this. And so there's a long ways to go. But this is getting kind of close to what a configuration would be. Now it's just a matter of just demonstrating that it makes a lot of sense.
Bruce, do you know, and you might want to go back to the back slide, or the previous slide, has there been any conversation about a better pedestrian connection to the west side or the south side? Or
Yeah, in fact, one of the things that this is the north half of this project. There's an entirely other southern half to it that basically goes to the left, if you would, and would connect out to 228th Street. One of the things that we have had a lot of discussion with WashDOT about is making, thank you, Dave, is making sure that we have that pedestrian, bike, multimodal ability to cross that area. Interestingly enough, there are a lot of limitations whenever you're spending federal money. And one of the things that we have to be careful about is demonstrating that this is not basically one of those things that's just another roadway. We have to show that it's actually for the transportation system itself. That southern leg is a long ways off, unfortunately. By the time we get to that southern leg, we're going to be all retired and on a beach in someplace warm. So it'd be great if we could advance that, but I don't know if we're going to be able to see that in the incoming future. But at least we're getting this.
Maybe it's worth pointing out that in the meantime,
yes,
they'll move the elevator here, bridge across to the bus stop, and this will be signalized, so there will be a crosswalk, and then you connect back to the bridge out here that takes you out to 527. So there will be a pedestrian connection that's actually a little longer than it is now if you're actually trying to use that to make a direct connection from the north side of Canyon Park to the south side, but it is still there. And I think the thinking is that mostly this pedestrian connection is feeding the bus stops along the ETL.
Yeah, it's just crossing that on-ramp. You know, there's a little pork chop there, but that's not going to save you. Yeah, it's just
Yeah, it's yeah.
tough.
It definitely needs improvement. No doubt about it.
All right, thank you. Sorry to.
That, yeah, no, it's a really interesting area to design.
I hate to over-engineer a pretty picture here, but I have a pretty direct question. 4 or 5 slides ago, it showed how much traffic, don't go back.
Oh,
It showed
okay.
how much traffic was going up 527 and 405. And I was struck by the fact that it said 30,000 cars a day on 527, and it said 125,000 on 405. So it is a quarter of the amount of traffic that 405 is, which to me is astronomical. I would have never guessed that. I see this drawing, and I see one large concern, and I know this is not the right forum, but I'm just going to say it. I'm hoping someone is considering having those buses go take a right and go up 527 from here, and putting that stop over there would not help with that. So would love to give you that feedback, that you can give that feedback up, because I want people who are going to take the bus from Bellevue, and that bus is going to take a right turn here and not necessarily drop people off here, but keep going up 527 to Mill Creek, and which would also alleviate people using the Bothell Park and Ride there, or Canyon Park Park and Ride. So
Okay.
let me over-engineer a pretty picture by just saying, probably wouldn't want the bus stop on that side.
Well, and actually, one of the things that's really been kind of interesting from this standpoint is watching the different transit agencies interact with WashDOT and trying to come up with the best way to service the area. And that's been sometimes entertaining.
I think the idea, to Commissioner Moracook's point, is to have rapid service north and south and 405. We're going to have a really great connection there, and then they'll have the the east-west service on Bothell Highway with the Swift line, which runs frequently at peak, and so it would just be a quick transfer, easy, get people home, keep people going from Linwood to Burien on 405.
Yeah, and in fact, that's a really good point, because the Green Line will have a stop at this Park and Ride.
It already does.
And, well, it does now, yes, sorry. I've been thinking about this thing for a long time, so yeah, it's there. In fact, that's where they were practicing the other day, so. Okay, anyway, so this is a project we're going to be doing a lot of time about. One of the things that you've probably heard some discussion about is some of the new Puget Sound Regional Council Regional Growth Center framework, and there's some new standards that we have to meet. This is where it gets kind of wonkish, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on it. But one of the things is that we have to demonstrate that we have 18 existing activity units per acre, and an activity unit is basically either an employee or a resident. It can be either one. And we also have to plan for at least 45. And you can see from this chart, we're pretty good existing if you go from a net calculation. We're a little bit short if you go from a planned calculation, and that's one of the features that we're going to have to do a lot of work on. And that gets to the bubble diagrams when we start actually putting land uses on the ground at certain heights and certain dimensions and certain floor area ratios. And those are all things that we're going to have some discussion about. This is an activity we're going to spend a lot of time on the 25th open house with people. They're going to sit around and put things and move them around and give us input on how they want to do that. This is going to be really critical to this area because we want to make sure we do match those 4 items that we've identified. And please don't forget about the open house environmental scoping meeting. I did this twice because we want to have a really good attendance to that, as well as take the survey. And the survey doesn't take very long. So that will end my briefing. I liked the comments. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And if there's anything more, call me or send me an email or take the survey. Thanks, guys. Appreciate that.
Thanks.
Thank you, Bruce. Excellent presentation. I know you've been working on that for a long, long time. And it sounds like you're going to be working on it for quite a bit longer,
Yes, indeed.
which is great for the city of Bothell and the region. All right, let's see. Reports from members. Any
Actually,
reports? Oh, more staff report.
one other staff
Okay,
report that
thank-
didn't get on the agenda. I do want to report that City Council did pass the accessory dwelling unit privacy amendments last night, so that has moved on. They passed the Planning Commission recommendation. And the work plan, calendar that shows items throughout the year that Mike Gutterman brought to you at your last meeting, showed additional ADU code amendments coming up, I think, in June to Planning Commission. And those were seen as being an outgrowth of some work that's being done by an ARCH work group between different communities, identifying ways that we can all work together or learn from each other on how to further remove impediments to ADUs. That group has kind of been on hiatus, and I don't think their recommendations will be coming out in a timely fashion. So we're looking at instead bringing some of the downtown code amendments to you in the June-July timeframe, and one of which there are basically two. That there's one dealing with the public open space and another dealing with our historic resources. That one is we're coordinating with a grant that our historic preservation consultant has, looking at the possibility of a historic district and enhancements of the downtown plan historic resources element. And so that one may be the first one to go, because I think the timing is going to work to coordinate with that effort in the June-July timeframe. What it means is that we're going to need to find some times to have some joint meetings with the Landmark Preservation Board. So I wanted to poll the commission about availability. They could either come to one of the Planning Commission meeting nights, or Planning Commission could join.
What nights do they meet?
So they meet the fourth Tuesday. So the dates I wanted to ask you about are June 5th, June 19th, which would be your regular first and third Wednesdays in June, or the Landmark Board's June 25th meeting night.
So you said June 5th, June 19th, and what?
And June 25th. So we're
Oh, I
assuming that you've got June 5th and 19th on your calendars, but
Correct.
would the 25th work, or are there any? I'm seeing a lot of nodding heads. Okay. And I can follow up with an email if you don't have all your calendar.
What is the time on the 25th?
They have been meeting at 6:30. I think they're trying to move that to 6. I'm not sure if that's happened, but yeah.
Are there no council meetings on at that time,
Good
or
point.
they double it up?
Usually council meets the first 3
Okay.
I
days,
see.
and then Landmark Board on the 4th.
Good point.
Okay.
So I was seeing nodding heads. I think most people are available for that. Looks like we have a
Okay.
quorum.
So that's to be determined still, but at least we know that that's an option. I'll be meeting with the Landmark Preservation Board staff person next week, and they're meeting next Tuesday, so we'll get their input and then let you know. So that's it.
One more question.
Oh, yeah.
If we meet with them on the 25th, which is Tuesday, would that be in addition to the first and third Wednesday, or would that be a third meeting for June?
It could be a third meeting,
Okay, thanks.
to be determined also. I think the main item for the meeting on the 5th would be that if we had them join you on the 5th. So we'd have to discuss whether we would go ahead with that meeting, and that does kind of bunch your meetings up toward the end of June, but so we'll get back to you on that.
Great, thank you. Looks like that's the end of the staff reports. Okay, so member reports. I'd just like to say I want to thank all the commissioners for letting Michael and myself know about your schedules. It's made it so much easier. So bravo to you guys for that. With that, a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned.